So you think you're shy and introverted? Socially anxious? Do you feel uncomfortable even in mundane social situations? And if possible, would rather spend the day alone at home? Even though you long for other people's warmth and companionship, you have this overwhelming fear of meeting them because, you know, you might like them, be close to them, and they might just break your trust and precious heart. Yeah, I got you. No matter how endearing they can be real sneaky and nasty, those people. Well, now let's take a look at this story from our not so far past and let's see what lessons we can take away from the way she had lived. Her so called life. Born Huguette Marcel Clark on June 9, 1906, she's the second and youngest daughter of Anna and William Clark. Her father was an entrepreneur who has gained enormous wealth from copper mining and considered one of the richest men in America during his time, the other being John D. Rockefeller. He is also a known philanthropist and a politician who served as a senator from 1901 to 1907. Anna, her mother, was just 15 years old when they first met, and she was his ward until they became romantically involved and got married in France in 1901, when Anna was 23 and William was 62. Huguette Clark spent her early life in France. When she was 5 years old, they relocated to Fifth Avenue, New York City, where they resided in an elaborate six-story, 121-room mansion which contained priceless collection of artwork by Degas, Monet, and Renoir, and others. It was the largest house in New York City at the time. She was educated at the all-girls Spence School in Manhattan. Though her father was a Protestant, she was raised as a Roman Catholic following her mother's faith and religion. In 1919, Huguette's older sister, Andre Clark, died of meningitis at 16. By all accounts, her death shook the 13-year-old Huguette deeply. 6 years after, in 1925, her father, William Clark, died at 86 years of age when Huguette was just 19. She and her mother then moved from the mansion to a 12th-floor apartment at 907 Fifth Avenue. 3 years after, on August 18, 1928, Huguette got married to William MacDonald Gower, a law student and a Princeton University graduate who was the son of one of her father's business associates. The wedding ceremony took place at Velos Guardo, her family's 23-acre estate on the Pacific coast in Santa Barbara, California. The same year, Huguette agreed to donate $50,000 equivalent to $852,000 in today's dollars, to excavate a salt pond and create an artificial freshwater lake across from Velos Guardo. The marriage lasted just barely a year, and by August the next year, Huguette was officially divorced at the age of 23. According to her husband, William, they never consummated their marriage, which, if in fact true, considering the way she had lived her life, could also make Huguette a virgin up until the day she died. Well, anyway, as if that even matters. After her separation from her husband, she moved back into her mother's 12th-floor apartment where she previously lived. Mother and daughter had rarely been apart. Even when she was married, she lived just 4 floors away from her mother's. The two was unusually close and would remain living together until Anna's death in 1963. Two women lived through and survived 2 world wars, plus the Great Depression, protected and isolated by their fortune. There's not much notable accounts of how Huguette spent her life in her 20s, 30s, and 40s while she was living with her mother, except that following her divorce, Huguette modified and expanded their 12th-floor apartment significantly, but it took up the entire 8th floor of the building as well as half of the 12th. The residence grew to a total of 42 rooms, including a 30-foot library, 40-foot drawing room, 40-foot living room, making it the largest apartment in Fifth Avenue. It was told that if you stood with your back to the fireplace in the library, you could see out to Central Park through the living room window that is almost just 110 feet away. Huguette and her mother continued to maintain Belasguardo, and during the Great Depression, had the original home torn down and rebuilt just to give people jobs. Huguette would visit Belasguardo regularly during this period, staying there with family and friends. According to reports, there she befriended one of their property caretaker's daughter and became close friends with her because both were shy and would often hide in the garden. She had a very small group of friends and was skittish around strangers, spending much of her time in private, rarely leaving her residence. Huguette was also a musician and painter and had exhibited 7 of her own paintings at the Corcoran Gallery of Art, located in Washington, D.C. She possessed an enthusiasm for the arts and was an avid collector of visual art as well as antique toys and dolls. She occasionally attended Christian Dior fashion shows in New York City only to find inspiration for clothing to dress her dolls. In 1952, she purchased a 52-acre estate in New Canaan, Connecticut, referred to as Le Vieux Chateau, but had never spent a night there. After the death of her mother in 1963, she became even more reclusive. Huguette had to find a way to fill the hours that she had previously spent caring for Anna. She decided to renovate her mother's apartment on the 8th floor using the decorating firm run by Robert Samuels Jr. and which her mother had employed for various jobs since 1926. But Huguette insisted on one provision, the first sign of what would become a lifetime habit. She refused to meet with Samuels. He would orchestrate work on her apartments periodically for the next 30 years, but she would never see him face to face. He'd tell stories to his family on how Huguette would hide behind the door and slip him notes. As the sole owner now of Belasguardo, which she had not visited since the 1950s, Huguette continued to maintain it throughout her lifetime despite her lack of visitation for a whopping cost of $40,000 per month. She also would continue to collect dolls. In 1973, she wanted a particular doll but couldn't find a store that had it. The daughter of her Irish maid, Delia Healy, was working at Alexander's and happened to see one on display. She bought it and stopped by to drop it off. She said that Huguette came into the kitchen to thank her in person. It was one and a rare exception to the no visitors rule, and she remembered that Huguette was wearing a lovely 1940s designer dress. She also said that her mom would prepare crackers and sardines still in the can, placed on a silver tray, and that's what Huguette would eat for lunch every day. Huguette also became addicted to watching TV. Her favorites were the Dick Cavey Show and the Forsyte Saga. She also had a deep fondness for cartoons such as the Flintstones and the Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. Her artistic talents gravitated towards teaching herself animation for a few years in the 1980s. She would record cartoons on her VCR, then watch them very slowly, constantly stopping the tape in order to photograph a scene, drawing it herself, then flipping the pictures in sequence. As the years went on, Huguette wanted to preserve every remnant of her family history, turning Belasguardo and her Fifth Avenue apartments like a shrine to her own past. She relied on Samuels to track down vintage fixtures and fabric. If furniture needed to be reupholstered, she demanded the same materials that had been used when she had moved into the apartment in the late 1920s, or when her mother had decorated Belasguardo in the 1930s. Even the light bulbs had to be antiques. She wanted to preserve anything related to her mother. Someone would recall Huguette wanted it just like Mommy. Now 84 years old, she knew she needed a doctor. She had a cancer that ravaging her skin. Huguette agonized alone for several years, too paralyzed to act because since she no longer had a personal physician, the idea of leaving her apartment to find a new one was unimaginable. She would later credit her friend Suzanne Pierre, the wife of her former physician, with saving her life. But in a real sense, it was she who saved her own life for finally asking for help. After listening to Huguette describe her symptoms, Suzanne insisted that Huguette see a doctor. She even found one willing to make a house call. Henry Singman. Singman was an internist whose office was just 2 blocks from Huguette's apartment. When Huguette allowed Singman to enter her home on March 28, 1991, he was the first stranger she had seen in more than a decade. Huguette insisted on being taken to a hospital by private ambulance, according to Singman, because she wanted to be carried on a stretcher when she left the building in order to avoid being seen by the apartment building staff or other residents. Huguette asked to go to Doctor's Hospital, which name is later changed to Beth Israel North Hospital, a storied establishment known as a fashionable treatment center for the well-to-do and for catering to members of the social and cultural elite. F. Scott Fitzgerald and Spencer Tracy had both been treated there after alcoholic binges. Georgia O'Keeffe had sought help for depression. Marilyn Monroe was treated for a miscarriage during her marriage to Arthur Miller. Huguette's former physician, Dr. Jules Pierre, had been affiliated with the hospital, where the staff was used to cosseting well-to-do patients. Huguette did not have health insurance and had not signed up for Medicare, so her lawyer, Donald Wallace, rushed over a cashier's check for $10,000 to cover her initial costs. 3 days after she entered the hospital, Huguette had surgery. The lesions were sufficiently advanced that she needed additional plastic surgery to repair the damage. Now Suzanne came to the hospital to visit regularly. Although Huguette's condition was never serious enough to require around-the-clock private nursing in addition to the hospital staff, Suzanne thought that Huguette should never have to ring a bell and wait for assistance. After consulting with Huguette's lawyer, Suzanne concluded that private nurses would give Huguette the control she wanted over who could enter her room. Suzanne interviewed and hired Hadassah Perry, a petite Filipina in her 40s. At first, the $30 per hour job appeared to be a brief assignment, since Huguette needed only minimal medical care. With little to do but talk, the two women hit it off. Despite Hadassah's linguistic difficulties, she was a sympathetic listener, and Huguette opened up, treating her to childhood and family stories. Huguette was relieved to have someone around who put her at ease and asked Hadassah to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Working an 84-hour a week is exhausting even to contemplate. Add in commuting time, and the situation can be summarized by 2 words: no life. Hadassah would be sacrificing her time with her family, and she had 3 children under the age of 8. No more weekends together, no time to supervise playdates, help with homework, or attend school events. Nonetheless, aware of Huguette's wealth and its potential, the nurse agreed to put her patient first. Within a month of starting her post, Hadassah brought her husband and children to the hospital to meet Huguette, who had previously shied away from contact with new people. It is unusual for a nurse to become so personally involved with a patient, especially at such an early stage, but sensing Huguette's loneliness, Hadassah stepped in to fill the void. Huguette's husband, Daniel Perry, who is a yellow cab driver, described his wife's work as the equivalent of being on call 24 hours a day. Madame can call anytime if she needs anything, miss anything, he said. Now that Huguette was ensconced at the hospital, she dispatched Suzanne Pierre and her granddaughter to her apartment to retrieve dolls to brighten up her hospital room. Their visit offered a sad glimpse of how Huguette had been living. They later said that Huguette's home was a mess. It was beautiful, according to them, but looked like someone had gone away from vacation 100 years ago and never came back. The telephones and intercoms were so old, the cabinets were filled with beautiful dishes and silver but were unpolished. It was apparent, according to them, that Huguette just lived in her room. After 2 months at the hospital, Huguette was pronounced well enough to leave, but there's no sign that she's willing to go home. Having spent so many years on her own, she had come to enjoy the attention, pleased that people seemed concerned and interested. First, she announced that the renovation of her apartment was not finished and asked to stay a few more weeks. Those weeks passed, and the hospital staff began pressing her about her plan. Huguette finally became explicit. She did not want to go home. In fact, she liked her new life so much that she had decided to stay at the hospital indefinitely. She announced her plan matter-of-factly. She wanted to speak to the director of plan giving and a deal to stay. She refused to leave and made it clear through her attorney that she would be generous if she got her way. Huguette continued to live like her old life while staying in her hospital room. She paid a daily sum of $829 to stay in the hospital. She still perused auction catalogs, instructing her lawyers to buy antique dolls on her behalf. She reads French magazines, but also kept up on current events by consuming the New York Times and listening to news radio. And she continued to watch cartoons, the Smurfs, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and Scooby-Doo. Huguette wanted to blend in at the hospital, insisting on wearing a patient gown, although there was no medical reason to do so. The slender, now white-haired octogenarian usually wore a cashmere cardigan over the gown, either blue to match her eyes or pristine white. To accommodate Huguette's demand for daily 12-hour companionship, her nurse Hadassah and her husband Daniel obediently rearranged their lives. After years of struggling with an unpredictable income derived from private nursing assignments and tips from the backseats of cabs, they reveled in Hadassah's new job's six-figure income and promise of long-term security. In 1992, Daniel quit driving a cab to become a stay-at-home father for their children. Not only did Hadassah work 84 hours a week at the hospital, when she arrived at the family house in Brooklyn after an hour-long commute, she spent her evenings doing chores for Huguette, such as washing her hospital gowns and making vegetable soup to replace the unappetizing hospital food. She could not put her job out of mind for even a few hours. The lonely Huguette called the nurse every night to make sure she had gotten home safely and to wish her good night. Daniel Perry also began to do errands for Huguette, taking on an expanding series of tasks that had him stopping by the hospital several days a week. At Huguette's request, he purchased a television and VCR and installed them in her room. He shopped for her Christian Dior stockings, Daniel green slippers, cashmere sweaters imported from Scotland, new Barbie dolls, doll accessories, and other toys. He steamed artichokes for Huguette and dropped them off at the hospital. Huguette bought Daniel a used car so that he could transport things for her. He would later give the family enough money to upgrade to a Lincoln Navigator, then a Hummer, and finally $110,000 Bentley. Daniel never kept a timesheet, but he was rewarded by Huguette with checks for as much as $60,000, often several times a year. In 1993, when Hadassah's house was flooded, Huguette told her to take some pictures and show it to her. She then offered to buy her private nurse a new house. She paid for the $525,000, the 3,676 square feet new house cost that Hadassah and Daniel chose. This home purchase made Hadassah one of the richest paid nurses in human history. In the years to come, she would receive tens of millions of dollars in gifts and bonuses from the heiress. Dr. Singman was concerned enough on Huguette's insistence on remaining at the hospital that he suggested that Huguette must see a psychiatrist. Huguette felt offended that her mental health was being questioned, so she adamantly refused. Dr. Singman chose not to force Huguette and just went on along with her because, according to him, the woman was an eccentric of the first order, but as far as that, her cognition was excellent. She had perfect knowledge of her surroundings. She had excellent memory. She was perfectly happy with the situation she was in. We tried to get her to go home. We made several attempts, many attempts, and she refused. He believed that at Huguette's age, therapy would not be worthwhile, and his was the final word on this subject. Other doctors didn't challenge his decision. So Huguette was never psychologically evaluated. Huguette kept telling people that she was content. She liked her life, even if it was an existence that normal people found incomprehensible. Her inheritance had always allowed her to do whatever she wanted. And now she wanted to live in a hospital room with constant human interaction, most especially with her private nurse. Given her previous isolation, she appeared to be making a psychologically healthier choice. During this time, the hospital administrators had maneuvered for donations, and several doctors and nurses had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts for themselves. While Huguette blossomed in this new environment, she would treat her new companions with stories of her adventures in Montana, Paris, Hawaii, and New York. She told her nurses about surfing with Olympic swimming medalist Duke Kahanamoku and about her first plane ride in 1919, an unauthorized trip over Central Park, courtesy of her nanny's pilot boyfriend. Though Huguette was at peace in the hospital and was able to let her guards down, she would never discuss the reason why she would prefer to live alone. And since money was never an issue, Huguette was able to stay in the hospital room as she wished for 2 decades until her death, 2 weeks shy of her 105th birthday. Huguette's former assistant once said, "She was an outgoing person, brave, try anything, nothing like the kind of person she became, and she never talked as if anything had gone wrong in her life. You got the impression that nothing was wrong with it. Obviously, something did go wrong." What about you guys? Do you think that there's something wrong with Huguette on how she chose to live her life? After all, she had never tried to hurt or bother anyone, right? And in actuality, she even tried to better the lives of people she crossed paths with. Is there really something wrong with her if she had not chose to spend her money cruising the world, socializing, throwing parties, engaging in romantic relationships to build her own family, build her own company, which what normal people with money would normally do? Well, as a shy person and an introvert myself, I could relate to Huguette in many ways. But then again, as someone who isn't born with great fortune, I guess I don't have much choice but to conquer my anxiety of meeting people, otherwise I won't be able to hold a job and survive. So in my opinion, her millions, instead of giving her security and confidence in life, is what made it possible for her to maintain her reclusive lifestyle, which in turn escalated her shyness to full-blown social anxiety disorder, which prevented her from experiencing the many phases of life we all humans are entitled to feel and experience. I would really like to hear from you guys, and if it's not too much trouble, please hit the subscribe and notification button down below. Since this is my first ever YouTube video, I would really love to hear from you again. Bye!